No one on the orbital station expected the alarms to sound that night. The outer senses had always been quiet, watching an empty stretch of stars where nothing ever moved. But when the first alert flashed across the screens, an impossible mass reading, far larger than anything human ships could produce, everyone froze. For generations, the distant civilizations of the galaxy had whispered about humanity as if we were myths. Some believed humans had vanished. Others thought we were only ancient stories told by wanderers. A few feared we were real. No one expected us to return, and definitely not like this. Ryan had always wondered what it would feel like to see something truly legendary. He worked maintenance on the station, fixing broken panels and clearing dust from old vents, never imagining that he would one day witness the kind of moment historians dream of. When the scanners sharpened their view and the shapes came into focus, he felt his breath catch. Hundreds of ships, sleek, dark, and arranged with military precision, were descending from the black. They blocked out the stars like a moving wall. The entire fleet slowed to a steady glide, as if they had rehearsed the moment 1,000 times, and stamped along the hulls, illuminated in pale blue, was a symbol no one had seen in living memory: the crest of Earth. Nearby, Lyra, the youngest communications officer on the station, stared in disbelief. She had studied humanity in the Academy's stories of old Earth, tales of impossible victories, whispers of a species that could rise from any disaster and shape entire eras, but even she had never fully believed it. Now, watching the fleet descend, she felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. If the legends were true, then this arrival could change everything. The command room buzzed with voices. Was this an invasion, a rescue, a warning? The station's defense grid, outdated and fragile, flickered to life, though everyone knew it would stand no chance if humanity had returned with the kind of power the old stories claimed. The fleet hovered just beyond the safe perimeter, silent and unmoving, as if waiting for permission to speak. Every second felt heavier than the one before. People gathered at the viewing windows, engineers, pilots, scientists, everyone pressed close, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. Some whispered in awe. Others backed away, afraid that even watching might provoke something. Ryan felt a chill as he noticed smaller craft breaking away from the main formation. They drifted forward slowly, almost politely, but their presence alone sent a tremor through the station's decks. Lyra received the first signal. It was a single tone, low and steady, carrying a rhythm that felt oddly familiar, something almost human. She glanced at Ryan, unsure whether to respond. The room fell completely silent. Then the signal changed. A voice began to speak, and before anyone could react, the fleet started moving again straight toward the station. The voice on the channel was calm, almost steady enough to sound reassuring, but there was something underneath it, an echo, a distortion, like it had traveled a long way to reach them. Lyra adjusted the receiver, trying to clean the signal, but the tone only grew stranger. It wasn't a language anyone on the station recognized, yet there were patterns in it, hints of structure, almost as if the speaker expected them to understand. The room stayed silent as the fleet drifted closer, their massive hulls glinting in the faint starlight. Ryan could feel the vibration trembling through the floor panels. Even at a distance, the arriving ships carried a weight that didn't belong to anything built in this part of the galaxy. He felt the pressure in his chest, the quiet reminder that whatever was coming had been planned long before he was even born. And with every passing second, he wondered if the old stories had left out something important, something the galaxy hadn't been ready to hear. The station's commander ordered a scan of the fleet, but the results came back in fragments. The ships were layered with alloys that didn't match any known catalog. Their engines were shielded behind technology the scanners couldn't penetrate. Even their formation, tight, unified, perfectly synchronized, hinted at a discipline no one had seen in centuries. If these really were humans, they had changed far beyond what the galaxy remembered. Lyra felt a knot forming in her stomach as she sifted through old Academy records. Humans had once spread across star systems with fearless ambition, driven by curiosity and desperation in equal measure, but the archive texts had been vague about their disappearance. Some claimed humanity fell to internal conflict. Others suggested they had retreated into uncharted regions, building something new in silence. A few theories insisted they had evolved into something more advanced, almost unrecognizable. She'd always dismissed that idea as a dramatic legend, yet now, staring at the fleet, she wasn't so sure. Outside the viewing window, the smaller craft continued to approach. Their navigation lights pulsed in a slow pattern, almost deliberate, as if sending a message. Ryan leaned closer, trying to spot any details, markings, windows, anything that might show who was inside. But the surfaces were dark and seamless, like they had been grown rather than built. He shivered, the unease settling deep. In the command room, discussions grew sharper. Some officers argued they should open a channel and respond. Others insisted they stay silent until they understood the fleet's intentions. The station had no allies close enough to call for help, and no ship fast enough to escape. They were alone, suspended in orbit, waiting for something none of them understood. The voice on the channel shifted again. This time, it carried faint traces of words, broken but familiar. Lyra's hands hovered over the controls as she tried to isolate the signal. The voice seemed to stretch across time, scraping against memories buried deep within humanity's forgotten past. Ryan watched her hesitate, unsure whether answering would invite peace or invite something far more dangerous. Then, without warning, the nearest ship's lights flickered. A beam of soft blue swept across the station, scanning every hull, every corridor, every person. And just as the scan ended, the fleet began to change formation, closing in tighter, as if preparing for something none of them were ready to face. The station lights dimmed for a moment as the blue scan passed through every level, leaving a strange hum in the air. People stood frozen where they were, unsure whether the scan had simply collected information or triggered something deeper. Ryan felt the fine hairs on his arms rise. Whatever the fleet was looking for, it seemed they had found part of it here. Lyra kept her eyes locked on the console. The signal from the fleet had gone silent. But it didn't feel like the end of communication. It felt like a pause, as if the fleet was waiting for the station to make the next move. She replayed the faint broken words from earlier, listening closely. There was something almost familiar about the cadence, like a forgotten dialect buried beneath generations of change. Elsewhere on the station, engineers scrambled to check the system's scan hadn't damaged anything, but it had mapped everything down to the smallest circuit. A few workers whispered that the fleet could probably shut down the station with a single command. Others wondered if the humans, if they truly were humans, were trying to see whether the station posed any threat. No one liked the answer they kept circling back to. If the fleet had wanted to attack, there would be nothing left to scan. Meanwhile, in the lower levels, a different conversation had started. A small group of researchers gathered in an old lab filled with relics from early space history. They had spent their lives studying humanity's disappearance, hoping to find the missing pieces that the galaxy had ignored. One of them, an older archivist with a quiet voice, pulled up a forgotten record from the earliest days of the outposts. It described a project by the last known human colonies, something about building a silent frontier. The words were vague, but the implication was clear. Humanity had left on purpose. As the researchers dug deeper, they uncovered scattered references to a catastrophe that had never been fully documented. Something had pushed humans to withdraw from the wider galaxy, something they had faced alone. If that danger still existed, the fleet's return might not be about reclaiming lost space at all, it might be a warning. Back in the command room, tension spiraled higher when a second signal arrived, this time from the lead ship. It wasn't a voice, it was a coordinated burst of data half-symbols, half-compressed audio too complex for the station's outdated systems to decode. Lyra routed it through every filter she knew, watching the shapes unravel into something like coordinates, but the coordinates didn't point to a location in open space. They pointed to somewhere on the station itself. Ryan leaned over her shoulder, reading the numbers twice to be sure. They led to the central archive vault, a place most people had forgotten even existed. It held fragments of early human contact logs, old star maps, and sealed files that had never been opened because the keys to unlock them were lost long ago. Now the fleet wanted access to it. The command team was split. Some believed opening the vault could show the fleet that the station had nothing to hide. Others warned that whatever was inside was never meant to be released. If humanity had buried its past, maybe there had been a reason. Before any decision could be made, the entire station shuddered. A soft pulse rolled through the hull, and every screen flickered to the same message sent from the fleet, just 3 words, translated automatically by the system. Prepare for contact. Every corridor on the station seemed to vibrate with the same quiet warning. Prepare for contact repeated across the walls, the doors, even the handheld consoles people carried. No one knew what kind of contact the fleet meant, diplomatic, physical, or something else entirely. The message felt too calm for a threat, yet too direct to ignore. It pushed everyone into a nervous rhythm, each person moving with the heavy sense that they were standing on the edge of something huge. Ryan found himself heading toward the central archive vault with a small security team. He didn't know why he volunteered. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the feeling that all of this had somehow chosen him. The corridor lights flickered as they moved, glowing faintly blue, the same shade as the fleet's scanning beams. It was as if the ships outside were watching every step they took. Lyra stayed in the command room, trying to maintain a clear channel with the fleet. The data bursts were growing sharper, more focused, almost like the fleet was adjusting their communication to match her systems. Every time she got close to decoding the message, a new layer of encryption revealed itself, hinting that the fleet wasn't just reaching out, they were testing the station's ability to keep up. The tension in her chest grew with each failed attempt. If she couldn't understand the fleet before contact happened, the station might be stepping into something blind. The researchers in the old lab sent another alert to the command room. They had uncovered new fragments suggesting that the Silent Frontier project was never meant to be rediscovered. The missing colonies hadn't just vanished, they had sealed themselves away, leaving behind warnings that had faded with time. One file even mentioned an internal signal system that only humans could access. If the fleet was sending encoded messages straight to the archive vault, maybe they were trying to activate something ancient, something the station wasn't prepared to unleash. As Ryan and the security team reached the vault door, the air felt heavier. The vault hadn't been opened in decades, and dust coated the floor like a thin gray fog. The door itself was massive, sealed by a mechanical lock older than anyone on board. Just as Ryan reached for the manual release, the lock clicked on its own. The sound echoed down the hallway like a whispered warning. The vault door slid open slowly. Inside, rows of old data modules blinked to life one by one, illuminating the chamber in soft pulses. It was as if the fleet's scan had awakened the vault from a long sleep. Ryan stepped forward carefully, his heartbeat thudding in his ears. At the center of the vault stood a tall cylindrical device, something he had never seen in any station blueprint. Its surface was smooth, dark, and marked with the same crest that had been glowing on the human fleet. Before he could call it in, every console in the room activated at once. Streams of unknown symbols filled the screens, swirling into patterns that matched the fleet's earlier transmissions. The device responded with a rising hum, as if waiting for a final command. In the command room, Lyra watched in shock as the fleet began to shift again. The ships moved into a tight protective circle around the station, engines powering up in perfect unison. Space outside the windows rippled faintly, like something enormous was about to emerge. The fleet sent one more message, a single phrase, a phrase the system translated instantly to instantly. It begins now. The words hung in the air like a warning no one could outrun. It begins now. Lyra felt a chill move across her shoulders as every display on the command deck shifted to show the fleet's new formation. The ships were no longer just surrounding the station, they were generating some kind of field. Thin lines of pale energy linked each vessel to the next, creating a lattice that pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm. No one had ever seen technology like it. Whatever the fleet was preparing, it required complete coordination. In the archive vault, the cylindrical device responded to the pulse outside. Its surface lit up with thin streams of blue and white, flowing like rivers. Ryan stepped back as the hum deepened into a tone that resonated in his chest. The security team exchanged worried looks, and one of them reached for the com to report the change. But before the message could be sent, the device projected a faint holographic shape in the air, something between a symbol and a map. Ryan stared at it, trying to make sense of the shifting geometry. It wasn't a star map. It wasn't any kind of chart he knew. It felt older, like it belonged to a different era of humanity altogether. The shapes folded in on themselves, revealing deeper layers, as if showing a path hidden within space. But a path to what? Back in the command room, the researchers contacted Lyra with an urgent message. They had found the final fragments of the Silent Frontier project, buried under years of corrupted data. The project wasn't just a retreat into uncharted space, it was a shield. A massive defensive network humans had created long ago, designed to guard the galaxy from something they had discovered beyond known space. Something they feared. But the final note was the part that drained the color from Lyra's face. The shield wasn't meant to last forever. It required a key, something only the return of a human fleet could activate. The fleet outside wasn't preparing for contact. They were preparing to reactivate that ancient shield. As Lyra relayed the discovery to the rest of the command deck, a sudden tremor rippled through the station. Panels flickered, and for a heartbeat the artificial gravity dipped. The field outside tightened, pulling energy from the surrounding space. The fleet was drawing power on a scale that the station couldn't measure. Then came the second twist, something no one had predicted. The station's long-dormant internal sensors, ones no one even remembered existed, switched on automatically. A hidden alert flashed across every terminal. Human genetic signature detected. People froze. There were no humans on the station. None had been seen in this part of the galaxy for generations. Yet the alert repeated, narrowing its signal, triangulating the source. Ryan's comm unit buzzed softly. The location appeared on the screen. The signal was coming from the archive vault, more specifically from the cylindrical device he stood beside. The hum grew louder. Symbols spun faster. The device reacted as if awakening to something or someone it had been waiting for. Outside, the fleet shifted once more, each ship aligning perfectly with the vault's location, as though focusing on the same signal. And the message returned again, clearer this time, as though directed at a single person inside the station. You were not supposed to be here. Ryan felt the words vibrate through the vault more than he heard them. You were not supposed to be here. The device's glow sharpened, casting long shadows across the floor. For a moment, he wondered if the message was meant for him personally or for anyone who happened to open the vault. But the symbol hovering in the air continued to shift until it formed a shape that looked undeniably like a handprint human. Unmistakable and waiting. Lyra's voice crackled through his comm, tense but steady. She explained everything the researchers had discovered, the ancient shield, the missing colonies, and the need for a human presence to activate the system. It all pointed back to the device in front of him. Somehow it contained a human genetic marker, or it recognized one nearby. Ryan stepped closer, his pulse pounding in his ears. He didn't understand how any of this involved him, but the handprint symbol pulsed gently, as if calling him forward. Outside, the human fleet's formation tightened even further. The energy lattice around the station had become almost solid, humming with rising intensity. Lyra watched the readings spike across the command deck, her voice trembling as she reported that whatever the fleet was preparing would activate in minutes. The station didn't have any control over it. All they could do was brace for the outcome. Ryan reached out slowly, his hand hovering over the glowing symbol. The air tingled, warm and strangely familiar, like touching something that remembered him even though he didn't remember it. With one steady breath, he placed his hand on the device. The vault filled with light. For a moment, he felt as though he was standing somewhere else, somewhere far from the station, surrounded by voices that spoke without sound. Flashes of old ships, forgotten worlds, and the first human explorers flickered through his mind. He saw the moment humanity withdrew, not out of fear, but out of a promise to safeguard the galaxy until it was ready. The shield had been their final creation, a barrier against a distant threat that never fully came into focus in the vision. When his eyes cleared, the device had transformed. The symbols drifted into a new pattern, one that matched the coordinates of the ancient shield network. A soft tone echoed through the vault, followed by a message this time unmistakably human. Calm and warm. Shield key active. Outside, the fleet responded instantly. The energy lattice expanded outward, stretching across space like a vast protective wave. The station shook with the force, but the shield passed through harmlessly, spreading far beyond the visible stars. In the command room, Lyra watched readings settle into a stable pattern for the first time since the fleet arrived. The main conflict seemed resolved. The shield was reactivated, the fleet had completed its mission, and the station remained intact. Lyra exhaled shakily, believing the worst was over. But as the energy wave faded, a new alert blinked onto the screens, something the system had never displayed before. A distant object had appeared just outside the far edge of the newly reactivated shield. It wasn't part of the human fleet. It wasn't part of any known registry. It was moving toward them, and for the first time since the fleet arrived, the humans sent a final message, short, urgent, and stripped of all mystery. We didn't return to open the shield. We returned because something else already did. The object beyond the shield moved slowly at first, drifting like a shadow against distant stars. But as the station's sensors strengthened their focus, the outline sharpened into something far larger than any known vessel's move, silent, and shaped in a way that didn't match human design or the crafts of any neighboring civilizations. Lyra watched the readings stabilize, her pulse quickening even as the tension around her began to settle. The threat the ancient humans had feared. Now it was real, visible, and awake. Yet the human fleet didn't panic. Instead, their ships shifted into a new formation, no longer surrounding the station but spreading outward, forming a protective barrier between the unknown object and everyone inside the shield network. Ryan could feel the hum of the vault fade into a gentle vibration, the device growing quiet, almost relieved. The final phase of its purpose had been fulfilled. It wasn't a weapon. It was a beacon, one that signaled the fleet to return when the galaxy needed them. The object outside paused just at the edge of the shield. It didn't attack, it didn't scan. It simply hovered, watching. After a long moment, it retreated into the dark, slipping away the same way it had arrived. Whatever it was, it had tested the boundary and chosen not to cross it. Lyra released a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The room softened with quiet conversations as people tried to make sense of what they had just witnessed. The biggest mystery remained unanswered, but the threat had passed for now, and the fleet's calm response suggested they had expected this possibility. They hadn't returned to reignite an old conflict. They had come back to finish what their ancestors started, protecting the countless worlds that had grown vulnerable without knowing it. Ryan met with Lyra in the command room once the station settled. She studied him carefully, still trying to understand why the vault had chosen him specifically. He didn't have any answers. He was just someone who happened to be there, someone who touched a device and somehow fit its criteria. Maybe it wasn't about lineage or genetic markers. Maybe the device needed someone willing to act, someone who didn't run when everything felt overwhelming. The fleet sent one last transmission. This time, the message was clear, translated instantly and without distortion. They explained that humanity had evolved across distant frontiers, growing into something stronger, more unified. Their disappearance had never been abandonment, they had only stepped away to prepare. And now that the shield was active again, they would remain close, watching the edges of known space, ready in case the dark shape ever returned. As their ships slowly rose from their protective formation and began to pull away from the station, a quiet sense of reassurance settled over everyone. The legends were true, but they were not the whole story. Humans hadn't vanished, they had grown, and their return marked a new era for every world that once believed they were only myths. Ryan watched the fleet fade into the distance, leaving behind a calm sky and the lingering hum of the shield across the stars. Lyra stood beside him, her voice soft as she finally broke the silence. "I guess the stories were always missing the last chapter." Ryan nodded, feeling a warmth settle in his chest. "Then maybe," he said, "this is where a new one begins." And as the station drifted quietly in its safe orbit, wrapped in the invisible strength of the renewed shield, the galaxy felt just a little less uncertain, guarded once more by the humans who had been legends, and who had finally returned.